mandated the Accountant General of the Federation to deduct from source amounts due to state legislatures as well as the judiciaries from the monthly allocation to each state for states that refuse to grant such autonomy.
Now, the majority of the Supreme Court justices who ruled to nullify Executive Order 10 adopted the expert opinion of Musbawa Adetunbi and Mahmoud Magaji, two of the senior advocates invited by the Apex Court to advise it on the matter. Now, the justices were emphatic that the president overstepped the limit of his constitutional authority by issuing such executive orders.
Now, the only justice who dissented, that's Justice Wani Abaji, held, and I quote, "We are not unaware of the hanky-panky and subterfuge played by state governors against the independence and financial autonomy of the state judiciaries." Now, it is a pitiable eyesore what judicial officers and staff go through financially at the hands of state executives who often flout constitutional and court orders to their whims and caprices. Thus, the Presidential Executive Order 10 is meant to facilitate the implementation of the constitutional provisions, unquote.
Well, as Nigerians continue to reflect on the Supreme Court judgment, what are the implications of this decision to the independence of the state judiciary, considering the attitude of a number of state governors as highlighted in the dissenting judgment? Now, how would the state governors be compelled, as it were, to implement financial autonomy of the state judiciary? Also, bearing in mind the clear provisions in the Constitution with particular reference to Section 121, subsection 3.
So, what are the sanctions in place for state governors that flout the constitutional provisions, like the one concerning autonomy of state judiciaries? Which way forward, or what can be done to, of course, bridge the gap? This and more are the issues we will be taking up today on Good Morning Nigeria. I am Claire Delabo Abdulrazak. Always a pleasure to have you join us on the program, and we're live on the network service.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague Claire to also welcome you to this edition of the program. We're here in our Abuja headquarters studios, and in the course of the program, we have our usual complimentary segments, including business and newspaper review. Right now, here is Comfort Amodu, who has the highlights of the morning news. Good morning, Comfort.
Good morning, Kingsley and Claire. Here's the morning news. President Mahmoud Buhari is in Brussels ahead of the 6th EU-African Union Summit beginning on Thursday. And at the summit, the president is expected to join European and other African leaders to discuss issues of mutual concern.
There are not less than 7 or 8 foreign heads of state who have indicated their wish to meet President Muhammadu Buhari. Huge interest in our own country. And it is, of course, to discuss matters of development for us, investment, weapons purchases, and all of that. So we are hoping that there will be so much that we'll take from here. And the presence of our leader, President Muhammadu Buhari, is of greater significance, and it will help in a big way to push the national agenda of Nigeria at this meeting.
And critical national issues, especially security of lives and property, dominated discussions as President Muhammadu Buhari granted audience to the governors of Kogi and Imo states. The Deputy Senate President and Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives also came calling before he departed for Belgium.
The President was very pleased, or is very pleased, about our performance in the state in the area of security, economy, infrastructural development, integration, peace and unity that are being enjoyed in Kogi State today.
To make some requests that will assist us in ensuring that the security situation in Imo State is stable and that the fight against banditry is also sustained.
And contrary to the story making the rounds, the President Muhammadu Buhari ordered that a query be issued to the Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority over the importation of adulterated fuel into the country. An authoritative source in the presidency says nothing of such ever happened. In a statement to this effect indicates that the earlier story by a national newspaper credited to an unnamed source has said an angry President Buhari, who doubles as Minister of Petroleum, directed the Minister of State, Timothy Silva, to issue a query to Farouk Ahmed, the regulatory boss. And the statement further said the President is aware that the Minister of State, the Chief Executive Officer of NNPC Limited, Milik Kyari, the NMDPRA head, and everyone involved are working together to resolve the issues at the shortest possible time. And the statement says what is uppermost in the mind of the President is the restoration of smooth supply of quality petrol to Nigerians. And President Muhammadu Buhari has transmitted to Senate the 2022 Appropriations Act amendment proposal. In the letter, the President requested for an amendment of the 2022 Appropriations Act to address current realities in the nation.
However, following the suspension of the PMS subsidy removal, the 2022 budget framework has been revised to fully provide for PMS subsidy. An additional provision of 2.557 trillion naira will be required to fund the petroleum subsidy in 2022.
And in other news, the Nigerian Meteorological Agency has predicted that the country will experience early onset of rainy season this year, beginning from February 28, 2022. Minister of Aviation Hadi Sirika released the compilation of the seasonal prediction on behalf of NIMET.
Rainy season is anticipated in parts of Plateau, Kaduna, Edo, and of course Imo.
And in health, 33 new cases of COVID-19 has been recorded in the last 24 hours, and the latest figures released by the NCDC. Lagos State tops the chart with 13 new cases, followed by Kaduna State with 9 cases. Delta and the FCT recorded 5 new cases each, while Rivers State recorded a single case. Nigeria now has 254,124 confirmed cases of COVID-19, out of which 230,472 were treated and discharged, while 3,141 have died of the virus from the latest figures. And that's the news. Good Morning Nigeria continues shortly after this break with Kinsley and Claire.
The 157-kilometer Lagos-Ibadan Railway is the first double-track standard gauge railway to be built in West Africa. The Mobolaji Johnson train station is a masterpiece, an infrastructure that is gradually becoming an iconic building in Lagos State. The modern facilities put the station on a world map of train stations. Likewise, other new train stations across the country built to world-class standards. The train and its convenience is indeed an admirable effort, with commendations from Nigerians.
This is a station that we have to commend the federal government for putting a beautiful face, empowering us in Lagos State, not only in economic and political arena.
I can say that I'm really impressed with the infrastructures in place. Kudos to the Minister of Transportations. Kudos to the federal government.
Truly, good things are coming out of Nigeria, and the federal government is deserving of all the applause.
Everybody knows the secret to good cooking is that special ingredient. The mothers know it, but does this new generation know it? Let's find out. Mothers, daughters, are you ready? Yes! Let the cooking begin.
Erisco tomato paste. Now we get home, now we get love, now we get children. We spice the world with a meal so great and so healthy. You know we've got your back. Oh, with Erisco, Rigico, Nagico.
Ladies and gentlemen, food is ready.
Food of love.
for the Yum yum for the
Erisco Rigico and Nagico tomato paste is made by Erisco Foods Limited, feeding Africans with healthy foods.
To the right. Bila, you go to the left. Do it.
Thank you for the rejections. That taught me to keep striving. Thank you for the long hours. That taught me discipline. Thank you for the knockdowns. That taught me to bounce back. And for the unexpected victories, that taught me to never give up.
Please welcome Dr. Succeed.
Thank you for making me who I am.
Since coming into office in 2015, the Buhari administration has recorded unprecedented achievements in all sectors, especially in the provision of infrastructure, which is the key to economic growth. Never in the history of this country has any other administration done so much with so little. Recall that when this administration came into office, the price of crude oil, which provides for 80% of Nigeria's budgetary revenues and 95% of foreign exchange earning, dropped drastically, thus reducing the amount of resources available to the federal government. In spite of this, the administration has continued apace with massive infrastructure developments.
This message is from the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Contemporary times require practical skills to remain competitive and relevant in your organization. Therefore, take advantage of NTA TV College Short Proficiency courses to sharpen your professional skills. Computer Appreciation for Media Practitioners. Date 21st February to 28th February 2022. 1 week. English Grammar and Pronunciation for Broadcasters. Date 1st March to 25th March. 4 weeks. Administrative Principles, Processes and Practices. Date 11th March to 31st March 2022. 4 weeks. Modern Trends in Broadcast Media Marketing. Date 14th March to 13th April 2022. 4 weeks. Basic Broadcast Accounting and Auditing. Date 4th April to 19th April 2022. 2 weeks. The course fee for the 1 week course is 100,000 Naira per participant. The fee for the 2 week course is 150,000 Naira, while the course fee for the 4 week course is 180,000 Naira only, accommodation inclusive. The venue for all courses is the serene and secure environment of NTA TV College, Mayor Old Government House, Rayfield, Jos. For more inquiries, please call 0803-314-4383 or 0806-980-9807. NTA TV College, training you to be the best you want to be.
Right, welcome back. It's Good Morning Nigeria, live on the network service. And today we're looking at business news in a moment. And we understand that inflation has dropped to 15.6% in the month of January 2022. Of course, that's against 15.63% in the previous month. And food inflation also decreases to 17.13%. Let's get all the details from our business news.
Latest data by the National Bureau of Statistics shows that inflation declined marginally in January 2022 after demand pressure pushed prices in December 2021, with the Consumer Price Index, which measures inflation, increasing to 15.60% year-on-year in January 2022. The Statistician General of the Federation, Simon Harry, who released the figures, is optimistic that the numbers sustained would decline in the year.
On the state-by-state comparison, all items inflation on year-on-year basis was highest in Abuja, the Federal Capital Territory, with a figure of 18.59%, followed by Kogi, which had a figure of 18.28%, and Bauchi, 17.61%.
On month-on-month basis, The food sub-index increased to 1.62% in January this year, down by 0.57 percentage points from 2.19% recorded in December 2021, and the urban inflation rate rising to 16.17% year-on-year in January 2022 from 17.03% recorded in the previous year, while the rural inflation rate increased to 15.06% in January 2022 from 15.92% in January 2021. Meanwhile, the World Bank has advised developing countries to focus on creating healthier financial sectors following the growing risk from financial fragility created by COVID-19 crisis and non-transparent debt. In its latest World Development Report, World Bank says finance for an equitable recovery risks may be hidden because the balance sheets of households, businesses, banks and governments are tightly interrelated as a result of high levels of non-performing loans, which could reduce access to finance for low-income households and small businesses.
Thank you very much, Comfort, for the business package. Up next for us is a newspaper review.
And let me welcome Bayo Atoyobi to do his usual newspaper review. Bayo, good morning.
Good morning, Clegg. Good morning, Kinsley.
Right, Bayo,
good morning, Nigeria. Thank you.
We have just two newspapers this morning. Let's take a look at the leadership. And starting from the midsection of the paper, the lead story says, fuel scarcity bites harder amid NNPC assurance of 1 billion litres. Fuel scarcity bites harder amid NNPC's assurance of 1 billion litres. You have a number of riders to that headline. Motorists and commuters stranded. Keep vigil at filling stations. Transport fares rise as 1 litre sells for 600 naira in Abuja and Lagos black markets. Scarcity may last for another 2 weeks, says Ipman. And President didn't order query of NIMIPRA head, that is the midstream and downstream petroleum regulatory authority. And that's attributed to an official. The composite photographs there on the front page show these queues at some filling stations in Abuja, Kaduna, and Lagos yesterday. Now, above the headline there of that's to say the lead story, APC governors disagree on zoning of party chairmanship and other positions. FCTA, that's Federal Capital Territory Administration, to borrow 200 billion naira for road and water projects. 5 killed as IED explodes in Borno. After ASU, Colleges of Education lecturers threaten strike. Clay.
All right, Kingsley, thank you. Let's look at midweek Al Jazeera newspaper, and it leads with supplementary budget. It says FG earmarks 2.55 trillion naira for fuel subsidy, and it comes with some riders. States LG is to cough up 1 trillion. Scarcity worsens. PDP governors tackle Buhari, and the other rider may affect inflation rate. Citizens economy crunches, and NNPC assures of continuous supplies as black marketers make brisk business. That's the lead story. Just above that lead story, you find Abba Kyari faces extradition to U.S. Police deny shooting intelligence and special squads. Abba Kyari faces extradition to U.S. and police deny shooting intelligence and special squads. And just trending on the left-hand column there, FCTA refutes plan to demolish Senate President and Speaker's residences. Details of that on page 10. And 3 Nigerian universities get WHO certification for vaccine production. It's also on page 10. And of course, in sports, that's Afro basketball. D Tigers, that's Nigeria's D Tigers, to receive 25 million naira presidential cash reward. and of course for qualifying and beating the Mali in the finals. Let's look at the picture story. The picture story there, you find Vice President Yemi Osinbajo being received by the Vice President of Liberia, Joel Taylor, at the Samuel Kenyon Stadium in Monrovia during the country's bicentennial celebration in Liberia on Monday. And to my right-hand column, that should be to your left, Oshun Guba Aregbesola can't determine my re-election. Oyetola, it's on page 28. And fresh crisis looms in APC over delay in sales of forms. And that is on page 27. That's the outlook of our midweek Al Jazeera. And let's throw the ball to Bayo Scott. Bayo, let's begin with the fuel scarcity.
Well, fuel scarcity, yes, it is still biting, but the situation portends an improvement over what it was yesterday. The length of the queues are reducing, but yes, the length of the queues are reducing from what I saw yesterday and from what I saw yesterday and today.
Certainly not, Bayo. Not if you're going to the MNK district. In fact, all the stations, the queues are. In fact, this morning as I was coming, as early as 5, you know, the petrol stations are locked. Yet the queues are as long as you can imagine, and the black marketers are selling as you know, as much as 7,000 naira. Yes, per 10 liters. That's about 700 naira per liter.
That's one perspective. The perspective I saw is that from what I saw yesterday and compared to today, the queues are reducing. And there are more filling stations now that are opened compared to what it was yesterday. Well, be that as it may, let's look at the development at National Assembly, where yesterday there was a presidential proposal to the two chambers of the National Assembly over an amendment to the 2022 Appropriation Act. The Senate President, as plenary, read the correspondence of the Mr. President seeking to provide for 106.161 billion naira for capital and 43.87 billion for recurrent expenditure. The President said that the supplementary budget became necessary to restore key projects slashed by the National Assembly. The total budgets that were slashed amounted to about 139 projects with a value of about 13.24 billion. The President also sought for 2.557 trillion to fund the subsidy in the 2022 appropriation year to cover the whole of the year. In the communication, the President also sought transfer of the National Assembly expenditure amount of 16.59 billion from the service-wide vote to the National Assembly statutory transfer. The President says this is in respect of separation of powers and the financial autonomy of the National Assembly. The President says he gave the indication of this amendment before he signed the 2022 appropriation bill. Meanwhile, the President arrived Brussels to participate.
Those stories, we took some of them in our bulletin earlier. The issue of the supplementary appropriation submitted by the President to the National Assembly is interesting. It means that for the rest of 2022, fuel subsidy will remain. That is, if the National Assembly approves the appropriation proposal as submitted by the President.
Yes.
So they might be looking at 2023 as the target year for the removal of subsidy. Although we should also point out that the Honorable Minister of State for Petroleum, Tumi Presiva, was our guest on Good Morning Nigeria a couple of weeks ago, and he did say that there were a number of milestones that the government was targeting, including, of course, the rehabilitation of the refineries, as well as the coming on stream of the Dangote refinery. That if this milestones kick in, and then we have domestic supply, then of course subsidy could be removed at a much earlier date than the period probably to be covered by the appropriation supplementary bill that the President has now forwarded.
Well, when the refurbished refineries come midstream and Dangote refinery also come in midstream, the tendency is that the idea of importing petrol will completely be eliminated, but it does not necessarily transfer to bottom rate price for petrol. because Dangote Refinery will be getting crude oil at world market price. And if that is the case, it means you'll be buying your petrol at the current market price then.
Right. So I read probably a day or two ago that the Dangote Refinery would get its crude oil at a Naira rate rather than international exchange, which would be, of course, the dollar. That the NNPC or its agents would sell to Dangote Refinery at the Naira, not at the US dollar.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
That's great.
That's what I read, yes. But the story about fear scarcity biting harder, I'm just curious. Let's take a look at it, because sometimes we impose hardships on ourselves that are unnecessary. So, Bayo, if you recall, it was only early last week, we started discussing to say, look, fuel stations were shut in different parts of the Federal Capital Territory, and we were wondering what was happening. Was it in anticipation of the removal of fuel subsidy or what? Until it became clear by Tuesday when it was announced that, look, there was some contaminated fuel cargoes. There were some cargoes of contaminated fuel that came in, and they needed to deal with that. NNPC often says that we have at least 28 days of fuel stock available. Does it mean that the contaminated cargoes, both the ones that had arrived and the ones that were on the high seas, were the only stock that we were expecting? Does it also mean that the cargoes that were discharged contaminated all storage facilities, such that you don't have any other storage facility that could be available? If you go to a filling station, for instance, they have many tanks. They have many tanks. Have they been able to isolate the ones where they dumped the toxic cargo? So that how come all of a sudden, in the last few days or so, queues all over the place? Assuming we didn't have this contaminated cargo, would we have been short of fuel supply?
Well, the positive indication is that some stations were shut, not because they were hoarding petrol in anticipation of increase in pump price, but because they had actually been supplied contaminated fuel. So they were waiting for those fuel to be evacuated. Now that some of them have achieved that, I think the fresh supplies increased by the NNPC have now reached.
How do you explain the fact that at the black market, you know, they have ready supply, they have supplies, and they are selling?
That is the curious question. Where do those boys who sell in jerrycans get their supply? When several times it has been announced that it is illegal to sell petrol on the street in jerrycans.
So, which is why I was raising the issue of the tanks that they have, the fuel tanks. If a filling station, unless it's a small filling station, usually has more than one underground tank, several, to feed the pumps that they have. So does it mean that all the cargoes are right? Because at some point we were told that the cargoes were deposited in the Lagos and Southwest area, and that those that were coming up north were recalled. So when did the contaminated fuel get to other parts and into all the storage, into the tanks that now, you know, filling stations are all closed? It's an important question. Those who are selling by the roadside, where are they getting their fuel supplies from? I don't know.
I did a little investigation yesterday, and one of them, a woman, said she gets up as early as 2:30 to go to the filling stations to purchase.
Which is the sell in the
precisely
deep time of the night.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm
sign
being
up,
asked, yes.
There's some dangerous thing that is probably playing out in Osun State. And I'm sure you have heard the stories. Claire also read that story from the paper that she has. It has to do with the supremacy of who becomes the governor in the next election. Aregbesola is up in arms against the incumbent. He has his own candidate. And of course, the incumbent is said to be a cousin of a godfather. And so each party is saying, no man is God, and nobody can play God. And I just want to remind them that they are probably coming 15 years late into the game, because in Edo State, that slogan was on for a long time, that no man is God. And that was to deal with political godfatherism.
And they said they killed godfatherism and they tried to resurrect godfatherism.
All right, gentlemen, Bayo and Kingsley, thank you. Thank you, Bayo. Again, we appreciate you always. And do have a pleasant day. And stress-free from fuel, search of fuel.
Thank you.
All right. This is Good Morning Nigeria, live on the network service. And today we'll be looking at the autonomy of the judiciary and the legislature at the state level vis-a-vis the Supreme Court's decision. Just in a moment, and you can still be part of our conversation if you, of course, tweet us on our Twitter handle at NTGMN. But that will be in just a moment.
The Nigerian aviation sector is rapidly growing with the construction of new international airport terminals in several regions of the country. The new Murtala Mohammed International Airport has an estimated passenger increase of 30 million annually and 15 million for Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport, Abuja. Malam Aminu Kano International Airport is also expected to open new frontiers for the region with more travel capacity for the annual Hajj, while the new Akanu Ibiam International Airport, Enugu, avails more business opportunities connecting the industrial cities in the region to the world. These new terminals beat world-class standards with enabling infrastructure that aid air travel, tourism, and the eventual growth of the country's GDP.
Open up commerce and, of course, link us to international societies.
People from international community will come here to do business, and then that will bring in more revenue to the state.
Now, distances can be seamlessly covered as Nigeria keeps raising its bar to suit global infrastructure standards.
The counsel of our fathers.
My advice to these young people is please do not take us back to those harrowing days. You probably do not know what it is.
Nigerian youths, let's build our nation together.
To the right. Mila, you go to the left. Should I do it?
Thank you for the rejections. That taught me to keep striving. Thank you for the long hours. That taught me discipline. Thank you for the knockdowns. That taught me to bounce back. And for the unexpected victories, that taught me to never give up.
Please welcome Dr. Chiksi.
Thank you for making me who I am.
COVID-19, that is the black swan of the century, has actually hit the whole world very hard, even the strongest of economies, and Nigeria was not spared. But due to the proactive stance and steps that the president has taken, we've been able to come out quickly. The president has consistently said we must invest in infrastructure. Even as we're investing in human capital, that we must invest in infrastructure, because at the end of the day, that is what will bring about a sustainable economic growth. So the president has given us our directive. He has said you must make sure you pay salaries and pay pensions, but you also make sure that the critical projects of roads, railway, airports, bridges, major infrastructure that are meant to drive the growth of the economy, that we consistently invest in them, even if we have to continue to borrow to do so.
This message is from the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Arise, O Nigerians! Let's applaud the courage of Flight Lieutenant Abayomi Dairo, aka the Aggressor, for his skillful and dogged escape from the bloodthirsty bandits in the forest of Zamfara State. 3 hearty cheers also to all military and security personnel who are tirelessly protecting fellow Nigerians from insurgency and banditry while maintaining peace and order. Nigerians are proud of Abayomi Dairo and all our gallant men and women in uniform for sacrificing so much to keep us safe. We admire your courage and we say thank you. God bless the armed forces. God bless Nigeria. This message is from the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Now, as a prompt for our conversation, which is on the independence of state judiciary, let's listen into this backgrounder. put together by our correspondent, Ekene Undulwe.
The judiciary, popularly referred to as the last hope of the common man, is seen as the guardian and protector of fundamental human rights in any democracy. To ensure that this arm of government performs its functions efficiently and impartially, the principle of separation of powers is adopted by democracies across the world. In Nigeria, separation of powers is provided by the 1999 Constitution. But despite this provision, the judiciary at the state level still remains as an appendage of the executive arm of government. Many believe that the absence of financial autonomy for the judiciary at state level makes it difficult for some judges to be impartial in handling cases that involve the executive, as the governors determine their finance. In order to ensure financial autonomy of the judiciary and legislature, President Muhammadu Buhari, in May 2020, signed the Executive Order 10 to give effect to the provision of the 1999 Constitution. The President's decision was met with commendations, especially from the judiciary, but state governors expressed concerns over its constitutionality. To effect the implementation of this provision of the Constitution was why the Judicial Staff Union of Nigeria embarked on an industrial action last year that lasted for over 2 months, grinding to a halt all judicial processes and leaving litigants with nowhere to go. The impasse was resolved with an understanding that implementation of financial autonomy will commence at the state level. Expectations of state judicial workers have, however, been cut short, as just on Friday last week, in a split decision of 6 justices to 1, the Supreme Court in Abuja nullified Executive Order 10 in the suit filed by 36 states through their attorneys general. The Apex Court held that Executive Order 10 was inconsistent with the 1999 Constitution and therefore unconstitutional, illegal, null and void, and of no effect whatsoever. What does this portend for Nigeria's judiciary at the state level? Guests on Good Morning Nigeria shall be speaking to the issues in a moment.
All right, thank you very much, Ekene Ndule. Once again, let me remind you that you can be part of our conversation by using our Twitter handle at NTAGMN. And our discussion today is on the autonomy of the judiciary and the legislature, and we're looking at it against the background of the Supreme Court's decision just a few days ago, yesterday rather. So let me quickly introduce our guests who are already seated here in the studio. Let me begin with a professor of law and former governor of Edo State, His Excellency, Professor Oserime Osumbo. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
All right. We also have here with us in the studio Mr. Temba Damien Agbe, who is Principal State Counsel, Department of Civil Appeals, Federal Ministry of Justice. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
All right. We also have joining us from our Kaduna studio, Yunus Ustaz Usman, his Senior Advocate of Nigeria, SAN, and of course a legal practitioner. We're glad to have you join us on the program. Ernest Ojukwu, who is the Senior Advocate of Nigeria, and of course he's joining us for this conversation. And I hear he's a pioneer head Nigerian Law School in Enugu. Thank you very much for joining us. All right, Kinsley.
All right, gentlemen, once again, our pleasure to have you join us for this conversation. Our principal focus is on the independence of the state judiciary. We do recall that last Friday, the Supreme Court, 6-1, there was a full panel of the Supreme Court struck down Executive Order number 10, which was issued in May of 2021 by President Muhammadu Buhari as a way of giving the facilitation, as it were, to the explicit provisions of the 1999 Constitution as amended. We're going to start off with just having to understand what the elements of independence are of a judiciary. When we say that a judiciary is autonomous or is independent, exactly what do we mean? We'll begin with Professor Osumbo, Professor of Law, former governor of Edo State, former senator of the Federal Republic, and in fact, he was also chairman of the Senate Committee on the Judiciary. Professor Osumbo, what are the elements of judicial independence?
Well, first of all, there is the separation of powers, which we have under our Constitution. And the reason why we have the concept of separation of powers is that one arm of government should not ride roughshod over the other, and that unless you separate these powers, there is the tendency for people to lapse into despotism and tyranny and dictatorship. So there are checks and balances. Although this is not watertight, each of these three arms is not, does not sit as an island of its own. There are interrelationships, but by and large, they are meant to be separate. The other issue is the concept of the rule of law. Civilized societies operate in accordance with the rule of law rather than the rule of man. And it is the responsibility of the judiciary, essentially, to keep the other arms of government in check by ensuring that they uphold the rule of law. And they do this by interpreting the laws, giving life to the laws that have been passed by the legislature and assented to by the executive. In order for them to be able to play this role properly, you have to guarantee their independence. And this Constitution of 1999 has, more than the previous constitutions that we had, set out to guarantee the independence of the judiciary. Because by so doing, you'll be able to strengthen them. The executive cannot, for instance, use disbursement of funds as a means of forcing the hands of the judiciary. And also in terms of appointment, dismissal, under the 1999 Constitution, the tenure of judges is more secure than it used to be. You will recall that in the Second Republic, as late as the Second Republic, it was common for state governors just to go on television and announce the dismissal, the sack of a judge. But we didn't have the NJC as it is now. NJC, you must pass the appointment and dismissal of judges. Judicial officers must pass through the NJC as a means of guaranteeing that judges don't operate under fear of sanction by the executive for a decision which they have taken, which may not be to the liking of the chief executive of the state. So now coming to the issue of financial independence, because you cannot talk of independence of the judiciary if you cannot guarantee their financial independence. If the head of court or the head of the judiciary has to be going to, in the case of the federal, going to the villa to beg for funds, or in the case of states, going to meet the state governors to beg for funds, then that already puts the independence of the judiciary, the impartiality of the judiciary in peril. Because there's quid pro quo. He who pays the piper dictates the tune. So if the chief executive, whether the president at the federal level or the governor at the state level, is paying the piper, paying the judge, then you would expect that there may be a tendency for them to interfere with the impartiality and independence of the judiciary. So that is really the reason why there's this independence. But despite the provisions that have been made in the Constitution, as I said, 1999 Constitution, well thought out provisions, we find that this ideal situation that was envisaged did not happen, which is why there had been clamor for some kind of intervention. I saw it myself as chairman of the Senate Committee on Judiciary, that something needed to be done to ensure that there is financial independence on the part of the judiciary. They do not go cap in hands begging for the release of their funds. And it is this clamor, I believe, that led to the president issuing this executive order number 10, which was the subject of the Supreme Court judgment last Friday. Okay. It's an attempt to solve a problem, which now that executive order number 10 has been nullified, declared unlawful and unconstitutional, the challenge still remains. How do we cure the evil that it was meant to contain?
Thank you, Prof. I think we would like to exhaust the question that Kingsley has raised, just to provide a kind of template for us to move forward. And just before we come to the studio, let's utilize the opportunity of the Zoom before we begin to have our issues with it. Professor Ernest Ojukwu is joining us via Zoom. At what point then, Professor Osumbo here has given us, an explanation of what it is, to have autonomy, especially for the arms of government, the legislature and the judiciary. But at what point do they correlate at the state level?
Between the judiciary and the executive? Or what?
Yes, the judiciary, the legislature at the state level, and the state government at that level.
Well, there are different checks and balances, as espoused by my colleague. One, of course, the person that will appoint the judges at the state level is the governor, after a recommendation by the National Judicial Council. For the position of the chief judge, the governor will have to take it a step further to the legislature of the state to approve that appointment. So that's some kind of check. There's also a Judicial Service Commission at the state that has some members who are appointed by the executive of the state. The process of discipline is about the same thing. On the recommendation of the National Judicial Council, it is the governor that will remove, if they have been asked to do so, a judge. In the case of a state chief judge, he has to also go a step further by getting that approval into the legislative arena for them to also give their own consent. So a few of those kind of things constitute the checks and balances between the arms of government in the state.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Ojukwu, for your opening comments. Let's also go over to our Kaduna Network Center, where the senior advocate Yunus Ustaz was earlier introduced. Senior advocate, let's also have your take on what the independence of the judiciary ought to mean. Professor Osumbo has given some elaborate explanation, but in practice, what do we find?
You see, I totally agree with my learned brother Silk, Professor Osumbo. But in practice, it is a totally different ball game, particularly at the state level. Let me tell you, let nobody hide from it. At the federal level, you have this autonomy. But at the state level, it is the exact opposite of what the provisions of the Constitution are meant to serve. The state judiciaries are strictly under the control of the governors. There is no state, to my little experience so far, about 40-something years, that is not totally under the control, the state judiciary that is not totally under the control of the state governors. And you know how they do it? Now, despite the provisions of Section 81, subsections 1 and 2, 162.9, 121, that says the financial autonomy of the judiciaries are guaranteed, and that all the monies meant for them should be given to them. Unfortunately, the National Judicial Council that is supposed to disburse this money directly to the heads of courts, direct them to the governors. And the governors, in order to coerce and control the judiciary in the states, keep this money, even where they are supposed to pay them en bloc, pay them in such a way that the heads of court must continue to come and beg them for anything. And the moment that happens, that independence is gone. And that is where we are up to today. So I think our main focus today should be, how do we get out of this problem? And may I just, if I'm not talking too much, may I just tell you, the only way we can get out of it, the only way is that, look, let these monies be disbursed directly by the National Judicial Council to the heads of courts directly, not through the governors. Somebody said, I didn't read the paper in Ghana on the independence of the judiciary. They have something like our own. But they didn't have this problem. And they told me, they say, what happens is that the governors do not even know when the monies come. But here, our governors monitor them and they always make sure that the monies come through them. So this is the problem we have. Some other person, a colleague said, what about section 162, subsection 9, that says it should be paid to the states? No, it says it should be paid to the heads of courts at the federal level and states. States there means heads of courts at the state level, not the state governors. But the governors are misinterpreting that to coerce the Federal Judicial Council to give them this money, say, give us, we'll give to them. That is not the construction of that provision. And it is most unfortunate. Up till now, I am telling you, there is no state judge that, seriously speaking, is not afraid of the powers of the governor. And that is most unfortunate. That robs this independence we are talking of from our hands totally. And unless something is done, and how that thing is done is that, look, all the states will do, give us the names of your judges and the allowances. Then their capital projections. Give it to the NJC so that NJC will give it to them directly. Do you know one of the ways the governors do it? They say, okay, let's see how they will do it. They don't have the list of the judges. They don't have how much their allowances and other emoluments are. They don't know their capital expenditure. So that you'll be forced to say, okay, since we don't know it at the federal level, we should give it to you who know it at the state level. And that is where they filter with these funds. It is most unfortunate. And I'm telling you, let these governors know one thing. What you do to somebody's child today will be done to your child tomorrow, whether you like it or not.
Okay, we are back to the studio. Let's also hear from Temba Damian Agbe, who is the Principal Counsel, Department of Civil Appeals.
Thank you very much. Well, independence of the judiciary under the Constitution is guaranteed. Practically, it is, however, different, as already alluded to by my learned senior. However, I think apart from financial independence, especially what I think the problem of Nigerian judiciary is the appointment process. When you look at the appointment process, it vested a lot on the governors. Recommendation. Why not? If there was a process, a mechanism, that the appointment be made by the NJC once that lawyer is qualified to take that position, it would have been a different case altogether. However, the appointment still lies on the governor. The only thing the NJC does is to recommend. Recommendation is not a command. If you recommend and don't appoint, there is no way that person will become a judicial officer. Now we come to the financial aspect of it. We look at the constitutional provisions, they are so beautiful, but they are obeyed in breach rather than in obedience. And I think until the judiciary are given that financial... Anyway, I can see that the Constitution has tried in a way, because the salaries of the judicial officers does not come from the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the state under Section 120 or 121. It comes...
Sorry, you can have it.
Yeah, it comes from the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the Federation.
Okay, so while he's having a cup of water, Kingsley, I think would you...
No, it's making a point.
So it comes from the Consolidated Revenue of the Federation. So in a way, their salaries and other allowances are not delayed. The basic problem of the judiciary when it comes to funding is the capital project, which ought to have come from the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the state. That is state judiciary. Their salaries are guaranteed by the Constitution. So in a way, if not for capital project, the Constitution has taken care of their other welfare. So a judicial officer cannot be afraid of the state governor for his own personal emolument. However, for the development of the judiciary in that state, he may likely, yes, to bend to the governor of the state. So there must be a way out.
So are we still blaming the governors? Because the senior Leonard Sake from Kaduna, is giving us painting a picture of, total blame on the governors. It's a constitutional, a gap, sort of.
Yes, the Constitution has made provisions for the charge. This particular money should be charged on this account without a procedure. Without a procedure. Once there is an appropriation bill or law of the state, definitely the money for the judiciary, the funds meant for the judiciary is determined. By that constitutional provision, that money ought to have been paid directly to the head of that court, of that state. Unlike the other monies under Section 81 are paid to the NJC for distribution to the head of court established pursuant to Section 6. So in that particular category, the only fund captured for the state judiciary is the remuneration of the judicial officers. And judicial officers here means the chief judges of the state high court, and the high court judges, the customary courts of appeal judges, and then the Sharia court of appeal judges. It's not for the chief registrar of that court. He's not a judicial officer. So he cannot benefit from the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the Federation. It is only the judicial officers that are. So I said, to an extent, their financial autonomy for their remuneration has been guaranteed by the Constitution. And the federal government is actually doing a perfect job on that particular aspect. There's no complaint as into the remuneration of judges and justices.
Well, thank you, Damian Agbe. We will get into the nitty-gritty of these provisions and then the actual practice. One of the comments you made has to do with the challenge of appointment of judicial officers. That's to say judges and ultimately chief judges of a state. Is this still a challenge? Because from time to time, at least you see the advertisements now for applications for persons who are interested in becoming judges, at least on various platforms. I mean, you do, your mates will circulate that for persons who are interested. Now, it is for the NJC, once the shortlist comes out, the shortlist goes to the NJC. The NJC then makes a recommendation. The governor doesn't have powers to appoint outside of the names that have been recommended.
Yes, I will give you two instances in Nigeria. We have the instance of Rivers State. I think the case that was Agumogo. There was a particular judge that was the most senior. I think one was picked from the customary court of appeal to be appointed the chief judge of that state, as against the usual practice. And then the Cross River issue came up. NJC recommended the female judge, I've forgotten her name, but she is the current chief judge of Cross River State. It took over 6 months, I believe. It took intervention from even the MBA from before the person that was qualified and recommended by the NJC was appointed. So even though we said that it is a recommendation that the governors still try to exercise their powers. And then, in the case of appointment of judges, especially, well, it's practically, we may not have evidence to show that sometimes you don't even know the criteria for qualification. You don't know the criteria. Lawyers apply. A lawyer of 15 post-call has applied. A lawyer of 10 post-call has applied. And a lawyer of 10 post-call that has handled cases up to the Supreme Court is contesting with a lawyer that is just 11 post-call that has never appeared even before the Supreme Court. Maybe from his call to bar, he was appointed a magistrate. I'm not saying he is not qualified or she is not qualified. Once you are 10 years at the bar, you are qualified to be appointed a judge of the High Court. I'm not saying the person is not. But in practical, let us look at a lawyer that was called to bar and secured a bank job and has been working in a bank for the past 10 years. And then a lawyer that was in court after he was called to bar up to 15 years, standing side by side. To my mind, I may be wrong, but a lawyer that has been in court all this while should be more qualified, in my mind, than a lawyer that has been in the banking sector for 10 years or 11 years without appearing before a judge or taking evidence or even addressing the court on the evaluation of evidence. So in any way, we may, on a practical basis or official basis, we look at it and we say, oh, the appointment is not flawed. But if we look deep into it, I think we still have an issue because these people are just recommended. Sometimes the recommendation, they are just recommended, and the governor has the right not to appoint at that particular time. I've seen it.
That's why I asked the question, Kingsley, if there was a gap. And just as you have explained now, and my question was, in relation to the appointment of, judicial officers. Kingsley, you could ask your question.
No,
yeah, because I was
to ask, just to probably provide one other example of the exercise of powers by the governor. Again, in Rivers State, this happened last year.
Yes.
They appoint a new chief judge. The most senior judge, Justice Akpoguno, was bypassed. And I think the second or third was then proposed and the name forwarded for recommendation and ultimately got appointed. So that happened in Rivers State last year. Justice Akpoguno, it's a live issue. She was bypassed once again. I'm just wondering, Professor Osumbo, let's look at some of these aspects of the Supreme Court decision. 6-1, the Supreme Court says, look, Executive Order 10 is dead. The argument by the Attorney General of the Federation was to say, look, the purpose of Executive Order 10 was not intended as a usurpation of powers or overstep of executive powers, but to give effect to the provisions of the Constitution, with particular reference, for instance, to the financial autonomy. It says Section 121, subsection 3, already guarantees that whatever credit is due to the judiciary in the consolidated revenue of a state should be handed over to the head of the judiciary in that state, which in practice we are not seeing. So, in your opinion, the majority, the judges, justices in this case, did they fully and with greatest respect advise their minds to the breach, extant breach of that provision of the Constitution, which Executive Order 10 sought to cure?
Well, Kingsley, I think I mentioned just in passing during my introductory remarks that the major challenge facing us as a country is how to make people conform with the Constitution. That is a basic thing. As my colleague here and as others have said, the Constitution has tried its best as much as you can to ensure that things are done properly. But the human beings implementing the Constitution have failed or refused to follow the letter and spirit of the Constitution, which is why we have gotten ourselves to this situation. I hope there will be time for me to speak on the dissenting judgment,
That's right,
which raised very pertinent issues, and we must not run from those issues that were raised in the dissenting judgment. But the decision of the Supreme Court is the majority judgment. The majority judgment itself cannot be faulted. I agree perfectly with the decision. In order to be able to understand the decision of the majority, which is the decision of the Supreme Court, you have to look at what Executive Order 10 actually says. What did it provide for? Because it is what it said that the Supreme Court was interpreting and deciding. Because state governments are not complying with the provision of Section 121, subsection 3, I'm sure that people advised Mr. President that you will have to intervene in this issue, which was what gave rise to Executive Number 10. Directing, it's a directive. Presidential order is a directive. Executive order is a directive from the President to the state governments that the money in the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the state or monies accruing to the state judiciary from the NJC must be credited to the heads of courts and the legislature. And that the state they must set up an implementation committee, a state implementation committee to ensure the disbursement of these funds. There will also be a presidential implementation committee that will go around states to ensure that the proper thing is being done. Kingsley, you will agree with me that this is the federal government wanting to supervise and check how a state manages its finances, which boils down to the question of true federalism. People have been talking of, we say we're a federal system of government. Let us operate as a federal system of government. If we're a federation, the federal government cannot be managing its own finances and also managing and directing as to how state finances are to be utilized. That would be contrary to the spirit of federalism. So the executive order was an attempt to encroach on the federal system of government by the president issuing directives as to how states will manage its own finances. In this case, finances that are meant for the judiciary. Because, as they said, we operate a federal system. We operate a constitution, and every arm of government, every official must conform with the provisions of the Constitution. So even though I believe that even the minority judge, the judge, he understands all these principles about separation of powers and federalism, but he felt that something has to be done to compel state actors to abide by these well-intended provisions of the Constitution. And why we have gotten ourselves in this situation, in this case, is that governors are actually very powerful, as has been said. And I also endorse the point which was made, and I am aware, when I was in the chairman of Senate committee, a case was brought to my attention where the governor of a state decided to appoint number 7, the 7th, you were talking of number 3, number 7 in the order of hierarchy. And the matter was brought to my attention. I also took it up with them at the NJC, and they said they are looking into the matter. The next thing I heard is that number 7 judge had been appointed and confirmed as chief judge of that state. I then went back and asked, but you told me that this thing was receiving attention. They said, well, what could we do? The governor insisted that that is what he wanted to do. What could we do? So you find a situation where, despite the provisions of the Constitution empowering NJC in terms of appointment of judges, at a point, the NJC at a point can become helpless. And they will say, what else? What could we do? Throw their arms in the air. That is the sad situation that we have found ourselves. And the judgment of Justice of Abba Aji JSC has challenged us to really reflect and see how we can overcome some of these problems. Again, in the area which you asked, there is the State Judicial Service Commission. It's not just NJC. The nominees have to be screened for judicial appointment by the State Judicial Service Commission. Yes. So, and it is the state governor that appoints people. He constitutes more or less the State Judicial Service Commission. We also have at the federal level the Federal Judicial Service. That is the first clearinghouse before it even gets to the NJC and the president, or gets to the governor, the NJC in the case of the states. So the governors exercise a great deal of influence, both through this well-established line understood by the Constitution and other lines not envisaged by the Constitution, which I alluded to. But to quickly just put some other issue in perspective, particularly the aspect raised by Ustaz SAN, my colleague from Kaduna, is that when the Section 84 provides that the remuneration, that is salaries and allowances of certain categories of people that are enumerated, must be drawn from the Consolidated Revenue Fund and must not be altered to the detriment of holders of those offices. And they are listed, includes the president, the vice president, governor, then judges, justices of the Supreme Court, Chief Justice of Nigeria, Chief Justice of the Chief Judge of the State, Customary Court of Appeal, and so forth and so on, up to Sharia, Grand Qadi and Sharia, and so forth and so on. So in appropriation, when the National Assembly does its appropriation, they appropriate from the Consolidated Revenue Fund the salaries and emoluments of state judicial officers, which is what has been happening. But this case, don't forget that the 36 state judges also challenged the federal government and sought an order of the Supreme Court for federal government to take over their capital.
That's right.
So are we really operating the federal system? State governors want the state high court judges, their salaries, remunerations, emoluments are being paid by the federal government, and then you want the capital to be paid by the federal government. But yet, you will be the one appointing them. And all the financial responsibility will be borne by the federal government. That is an anomaly under a federal system
let's
of government.
pause you and also bring in again, we go to Professor Ernest Ojukwu, who's joining us via Zoom. Prof, I don't know, it's all, I'm getting too confused in all of this. You know, on one hand, we put the state governors in a box and box them, you know. On the other hand, we close our eyes to the real issues that present the loophole for the governors. Now you're asking that the monies or the funds meant for the judiciary and the legislature be given to them first line charge. The state governors are also to, you know, be responsible for the capital projects. Where do they get the funds to do that? If you give the legislature and the judiciaries their funds at first line charge, would they also be responsible for executing their own capital projects?
You're echoing a lot. If you can repeat the question exactly, let me know exactly what you asked.
If the judiciary and the legislature get their first line charge funds as, you know, has been directed, will they also be responsible in executing their own capital projects rather than asking the state governors to also bear that burden?
Yes, I mean, it's clearly the issue of federalism now. If you are if you're a state, you're autonomous, you wake up in the morning and sleep at night as a state. So you generate your own funds, you manage your own economy. That's how states are function in federal government. And that is the basis of the demarcation. Now, the reason for the budgeting by the federal government for the remuneration of certain judicial officers named in the Constitution is based on our history of judicial autonomy. And so at the time of transiting to a civilian regime in 1999, our experience showed that, look, we need to protect these judges. That's why the constitutional drafters wrestled at least the remuneration of judges from the state. It's not that it's the ID thing. It was supposed to be paid by the states, but because of our history, they decided, look, let's take this part, be sure that judges at least get their salaries. And then the NJC, of course, also made sure that at implemented it, they put it in their own budget. And so there'll be no question about who had the duty to take over the remuneration of judges. That's the protection. It's the history of the country. So basically, it's supposed to be state. Now, it's also good to mention that apart from the capital that the states are supposed to fund, the states are also supposed to fund some other recurrent expenditures for the judiciary. It's not, the only salary has been taken out from them. So the maintenance of the environment is under them. The provision of vehicles and all those type of things, they're supposed to deal with it. And even the pension and gratuity is handled by them too, a chunk of it. So, and these things is it's supposed to come under the economy of the state. You shouldn't take it away from them. Now, the problem now is that the states actually provide these funds in some cases, but they provide it as gifts. That's the major problem. Use it as the rope to hang on the necks of the judges or the judiciary in the state and control them like slaves. There's a total connection between that financial autonomy, which the governors have refused to implement, and the independence of the judiciary, even in respect of appointment of judges. The question was asked earlier: how does the state governors control the appointment of judges? Let me tell you the real thing. It's not the theory. Apart from one or two governors who are decent, because it has to do with human beings I was talking about. Majority of the governors have learned over the years how to control the judiciary through their funding mechanism. Even as much as the courts observing their new legal year ceremonies, they have to run around governors begging them for 2 million or 3 million or 5 million for them to do it. And that's why many states don't hold their new legal year ceremonies at the new legal year. Sometimes it takes them even 6 months to perform the new legal year ceremony because they don't have the funds to spend 5 million or 10 million or 50 million to perform a simple thing as new legal year. Now, so what happens is that because the governors are in total control, they give them these monies as dash, fund them as they wish. The judges have to continue running around them, and in some cases, even the individual judges have to come to the governors to beg them for one support or the other. Now, when it comes to the appointment process, if the state needs to appoint 5 judges, the governors, through their appointees in the State Judicial Service Commission, will provide a list of those 5 people, or at least 4, for that process. So a list is predetermined by the governor who gets appointed. The analysis is what is used to present what the agency requires. The agency requires, if you're going to appoint 10, you need to provide us 5, you need to provide us 10 names. 2 for one post, 2 for one post, so that there will be some kind of reserve list. Now, if you provide that reserve list, in many states, the governors will give the Judicial Service Commission of the state 8 names for that appointment and leave 1 or 2 for the chief judge to use as his own quota. So the list is predetermined. The positioning of how it is positioned, because if you go to the NJC, there's a priority on the list. Number 1 is more likely to get appointed before any other one. So you also have to arrange the list in accordance to what the governor wants, because he knows, he understands that NJC normally will follow that priority list in recommending to him, except in where there's a major problem. And recently, there have been some attempts by the NJC to show some muscle by rearranging the list based on the interviews they conduct at the NJC. Well, generally, the list provided by the governor is what the State Judicial Service Commission is going to provide the NJC as their advice. And it's what the NJC generally has to return to the governor as their advice. And it's what the governor will appoint. If the list changes, the chief judge, in many cases, is going to have problems with getting funds for that period. So, remember, they are getting their pensions through the state. Chief judges, some chief judges, and I know personally, have not been paid for 2 years, 3 years, their pension. They go hand in hand with the cap, begging people to support them, to support their eating, their survival. They don't have any kobo for a month. Chief judges. And so if you are going a chief judge and you know what your predecessor is suffering, you'll be afraid of retiring without any funding. And so some governors will decide, for example, instead of you, because that pension will not come, so when you are retiring, they provide you some fund under their security votes and dash these chief judges that have performed well, has a good relationship with them, especially when they are weak in allowing them to control them. So they use the funding, that capital project, and the other funding as the stick controlling the state. It's a total control. So the problem with that budgeting is that that funding is that the state ought to budget it in their put it in their budget and approve it, and there's no way you can tell state A to budget the same thing for state B, and of course the judiciary in one state will not have the same problem generally all the time with this another judiciary in another state. So the control is that budget and the release of the fund. The money is not released to them, and even when the state is so-called states, some so-called states are doing well for the judiciary, they are in total control of that funding. Go meet the chief judges. You see how the chief judges tremble at the sight of the voice of the governor, because the governor is controlling the entire process of the funding process, even when they're supposed to be doing well, good courts, good cars, and all that, travel abroad for medicals and so on. But the governor is in charge. So that's the hopelessness of the situation, that the law is there, the constitution is there, the courts are there, but we have refused as human beings to perform our own duties and responsibilities as the leaders of the country. And it's a very sad development. I would have expected that case that went to the court, in the Supreme Court, I would have expected one or two governors to say, no, I'm not going to be part of this. I am going to strive and now implement this process. Instead of going to challenge the federal government and make a nonsense of our democracy.
Professor Ernest Ojukwu, thank you very much there for your explanation. We had, in fact, discussed Executive Order 10 sometime last year, and the Attorney General of the Federation and some other guys did say that they were having implementation conversations. One of the governors, I think the governor of Plateau State, was also our guest on that occasion. And the whole idea was, fine, they were trying to find a middle ground for the proper implementation of Executive Order 10. And I think all of these issues around the powers and then the finances were matters to deal with. But Yunus Ustaz, learned senior advocate with us in Kaduna, there are a number of issues, but the main chunk is that in terms of the financial independence of the judiciary, the Constitution already makes provisions for the salaries, allowances, and emoluments of judicial officers. So state governors have no control over that. But it is in the area of recurrent expenditure, excuse me, and there are a number of items in that recurrent, whether you are going for training, you're going for travels, and even stationery, and so on and so forth, that the chief judge who is up or his nominee will have to go with a file and then sit out along with other guests, awaiting the governor to ask him to come before the governor signs. That's one area. The other area, of course, has to do with capital projects. What kind of projects do you do? And capital projects are not just buildings and so on and so forth. They could also be a broad range of items. The Constitution already envisaged the likelihood of abuse and therefore the emperor status of governors by making that provision in Section 121, subsection 3. That, look, a state like the federal has a consolidated revenue fund, and whatever credit there is to the judiciary should be transmitted to the head of that court so that all these issues around control over recurrent expenditure and capital expenditure will not arise, because the salary and emoluments aspects is already taken care of. But the Supreme Court appears to say, well, the practice is governors are in charge, let them continue to be in charge. How do we get around this if the clear letter of the law is not being respected by state governors?
Very much. I had said earlier on, and when you read the dissenting judgment on Honorable Justice Abba Aji, I think it solves the practical problem, how to get around this. And you see, the governors are not wise. They shot themselves on the foot by even going to the Supreme Court. Now, you want control, and you say federal government should pay the capital projects and so on, and then you control. It is just like a baby sucking the mother's breast. Say, yes, feed me, and then I'll still beat you. and then, unfortunately for them, to me, it's not a win situation for the states at all. Because the Supreme Court now said, okay, now, yes, the Executive Order 10 has been struck down, but then you are the one to fund your capital projects for your judiciaries. This is what they were trying to run away from. They want control, but they don't want to be responsible at all. I'm not accusing them. Some of them are my friends, but of recent, some of them don't pick my calls because of my advice to them. But, it's just like the logic of the alligator. Alligator will say that he doesn't want rain to beat it, and then when the rain is coming, to run back into the river. So now they have more financial burden by trying to rush to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court did not say that financial autonomy is not there. The majority judgment didn't say so. It says, look, because of separation of powers between the federal government and the state government, the executive on Order 10 will not be in tune with the Constitution. But then it was made in absolute good faith, because the governors have totally refused to obey the constitutional provisions, and they have no competent state legislative houses to compel them to do so. Because as of now, like the judiciary in the states, the state legislative houses are even the worst. They are totally under the control of the governors. In fact, the governors dictate what resolutions they should pass. And so, there's nobody to question them. In a normal situation, in a law-abiding state, which we do not have in this country, quote me anywhere. You see, these things, they breach, the failure to give the heads of courts their money en bloc, and I mean en bloc, and that's where the control comes from. En bloc is a breach of the Constitution, and so it's an impeachable offense. But who are to do so? The bodies to do so are the state legislators. But no state legislature today can do that. And that is why the governors are the governors, the chief executive, the head of the legislative houses, and practical heads of courts. If the legislative houses were independent, we won't talk of these practical problems. They'll just say, if you don't do so, we'll impeach you. But in fact, apart from the fact that their elections were manufactured and it is the candidates of the governors that were elected, not elected, those elected, but they call it election. So this is really the issue, but I'm even happy about that decision because it says, okay, now you want control. If you want control, then you should fund the other aspects of their budget. And I'm sure they're not happy now. But you see, like I was saying earlier, one of the ways of this control, again, if even the welfare, something like housing allowances and so on, do you know how some states, particularly northern state governors do it? Where the housing allowance is supposed to be 200,000, they now give 30. Yes. If you have no somewhere, if you have nowhere to sleep, you don't have this. Of course, you will be bound by whatever the governor wants you to do. This is how this control is done. It's not that they go there and say, do this. So, and they say, we know your financial issues can only be solved by us. Solved by us, not with our own money, but with the monies that are meant to be given to the heads of court directly. And that is why they give it piecemeal. And that's why we are in this problem today. And then, I'm sorry, this issue of appointment of judges, the appointment itself doesn't bother me really, because you see, even if it is your son that you appoint a position today, the moment he's there, you can no longer control him. Once he's on seat, you can't control him. It is before then that they have this total control of trying to get whoever is there. And the NJC will send in names. The governor will say, I don't want to appoint that. And at the end of it, the governor will have his day because NJC will just be begging. That is how, in practice, that is how they control.
Let's put you on hold. We've gone way past our commercial break period. We'll be right back just after this break. Let's quickly take our commercials now.
The ever-busy ancient city of Onitsha is a commercial hub with millions of commuters seamlessly linking other states daily for business, leisure, and other purposes. To upscale its road network, the construction of a 1.6-kilometer long Second Niger Bridge, including a 10.3-kilometer highway furnished with other infrastructure, has been in motion by the federal government. This project will ease congestion on the existing 56-year-old Onitsha Bridge and boost the economic capacity of the state as it easily connects to other parts of the country. The completion of the world-class Second Niger Bridge Onitsha will be one of the many proud moments of the state, its people, Nigerians, and foreign investors. Onitsha, which hosts the largest market in Africa, is geared up to boast of an impressive road network. Once again, these moments are made alive by the federal government, and it is deserving of all the applause.
We've been trying our best to contain the situation. And in our operations, we've been able to make a lot of recoveries. We've been able to also arrest suspects that are involved in this kind of activities. And we've been able to also recover, particularly arms and ammunition, from those who are carrying it unlawfully and disturbing the peace of the people. But generally, our morale in the Nigerian police is always guided by our commitment to do what we have sworn to do. Peace and security must be looked into as a priority by all, to look at security as the business of all of us.
This message is from the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
We are all night Nigerians, against all odds, we shall and must remain united. We may have our challenges, our problems, and setbacks. However, together we shall overcome them all. What doesn't break us shall make us stronger. This is the mindset that shall bring peace, progress, and prosperity to our beloved country. Do not let tribal and religious sentiments govern how you think, act, or feel. Don't be influenced by those who want to destroy our precious national unity. Everybody who's a Nigerian is your brother and your sister. This is the mindset of the new Nigeria. It is also the mindset that we must all adopt. Let us support each other in creating the Nigeria of our dreams. This message is from the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA.
To the right. Bila, you go to the left. Should I do it?
Thank you for the rejections. That taught me to keep striving. Thank you for the long hours. That taught me discipline. Thank you for the knockdowns. That taught me to bounce back. And for the unexpected victories, that taught me to never give up.
Please welcome Dr. Chuksi.
Thank you for making me who I am.
All right, welcome back to the program, and let's quickly continue our conversation. Damien, the decision of the Supreme Court, is infallible. I mean, the executive order has been, squashed. It's no longer in contention. But the state governors have not said they would not, comply with the provisions of the Constitution with regards to autonomy. In fact, some of them have said they have gone ahead to, implement or put up structures and all that. But what does it mean without the first-line child deductions?
First, let me just begin with the first thing we need to know. In fact, everybody knows Executive Order Number 10 without even knowing the full citation of that order. It was implementation of financial autonomy of state legislature and state judiciary order of 2020. That is the real name of that order. And that order, the name is not unconstitutional per se. The order has been, we cannot fault the majority judgment of the Supreme Court. It has said the president overstepped his boundary. Not that then nullified the order. But for us that participated in this case, we still believe it's a win for us. We still believe the executive order of the president actually brought out something positive, no matter its nullification. First, there was a judgment of the Federal High Court sometime that Jusun dragged the state governors and the attorney generals to court in the Federal High Court and got a judgment on this issue. So that judgment still subsists. And now, there's a clear pronouncement of the Supreme Court that it is your responsibility to take care of this order financing of the judiciary. So if any court is dilapidated or not functional, the governor will know that it is, the Supreme Court has said it is your responsibility. So you failed if the court is not. So we believe, and I believe Nigerians will be happy to know that the president took a step. And even though the Supreme Court said, no, you are not supposed to go further than this, but the president acted in good faith, considering the fact that under Section 5 of the Constitution, he has been given the power to enforce the Constitution for the entire federation or any part. And let us say that before now, it was only the judiciary that were pronouncement, the Section 2121 captured then only the state judiciary. But with the fourth alteration of the Constitution, which is an act of the National Assembly, which the president has the power to enforce, brought in the issue of state legislature. So the president acted, considering the fact that the law enacted by the National Assembly gave him the power to enforce it. We are not faulting the majority judgment of the Supreme Court. As I said earlier, we believe it's a win situation as it is today. For us.
So it gives you room to hold the state governors accountable. Is
accountable. The legislature, as the learned Sikh said earlier, should have been the body responsible for checking the powers of the governor. You are not doing the right thing by not sending this money directly to. However, yes, I'm sorry to say, but they've been reduced to. There's an interference.
But that's precisely where the problem lies. And these are the practical challenges that have been highlighted. That, the Supreme Court has said, look, the president had an overreach in seeking to implement that provision of the Constitution. But there was no, I've not read the full judgment, I must admit, because the full judgment is not available just yet. But the Supreme Court, their lordships did not then say what the consequences would be for anyone that fails to implement Section 121, subsection 3, for instance. Because if the subterfuge of their excellencies continues, then what happens?
As I said earlier, before now, the discussion on judicial independence was also out there, but there was nothing, no attempt before now to enforce this particular. The president has took a bold step to try to enforce that.
Okay.
And I think it has brought...
That bold
Could we have done it, in another way?
You mean the president?
Yes.
To direct the states?
To enforce...
No, there's no other way he could have done it that I know of. But let me just agree with my colleague here that it's a win-win situation, irrespective of the outcome of the case. It has opened the eyes of everybody. It has exposed the state governments and put them in the public eye that you are not implementing Section 121, subsection 3 of the Constitution. As to consequences, I think, Kingsley, were you the one who asked? There are supposed to be consequences for flouting or violating any provision of the Constitution or any law. And as was said before, validly made. That is an impeachable offense. But who will implement it is the state legislature that is perhaps even in a weaker position than even the state judiciary. In terms of looking at the way forward, as I said before, this has exposed a major problem in our practice of democracy and constitutionalism. How do we overcome this? We are talking of Section 121, financial autonomy of the states, but Nigerians are already familiar with the breach of the provision relating to state independent electoral commissions, elections into local government councils. Every Nigerian knows now that that is a big issue. That virtually all the state governments, the state independent electoral commissions don't enjoy any independence. Hardly do they. One of perhaps an exception, the recent elections in Kaduna State, where the governor or the state independent electoral commission actually returned people who ran under the platform of political party other than the governor's political party. But in most cases, all the councillors and all the chairmen of the governor's party become elected. You can see that something is wrong there. And because of this, many people clamor that INEC, the federal one, should be responsible for the conduct of local government council elections. Is that really a solution? Because local governments should be under the states. Why can't the states? What should Nigerians be doing to ensure that states perform their roles properly under the Constitution? At the federal level is relatively better. Things work better. Performance of oversight functions at the federal level is much better than at the state level. the electoral body at the federal level is much better than the one at the funding of the federal judiciary is much better than at the state level. Why can't the states begin to emulate, or people in the state challenge their states to rise up to the standard at the federal level?
Very valid issues you have raised, Prof. We're getting pressed for time. I want to throw in this other issue about the consequences of the control and therefore emasculation of the state judiciaries. In jurisprudence, this is the realism school. The Scandinavians and the Americans have different perspectives. But in practical terms, Professor Ojukwu, if you are still there with us via Zoom, when we say control and emasculation, on Good Morning Nigeria, we have discussed issues around, for instance, consequences for election-related violence. And these are usually offenses under the current statutes, triable by state courts. And so when you have the judiciary of the state under the control of the executive, some persons would argue that this is the reason why violent thugs, who belong to the, or who are working for the party in the control of the state, never get punished for election-related violence. And at the end of the day, justice suffers where, for instance, the state government or the state governor, with greatest respect to them, where they have an interest in a particular matter. How do we get around this, Professor Ojukwu, quickly?
Yeah, can I be heard? I think the whole idea goes down to a political solution. We have to create awareness among our people. We have to engage, we have to make our people get aware that be part of the system and engage with our leaders. We have left them too long to continue to do anything like. The examples of misgovernance is so great at the state level, so terribly great. And we have had some of them, from the ANEC to local government control to judiciary control. We have to create awareness.
Okay, I can see it now.
We have to purposefully
yeah.
Professor Ojukwu, it looks like there's some interference. Probably you have multiple phones or appliances on, and there is interference. While you sort that out, let's go back to Kaduna and get Yunus Ustaz's comment. Yunus Ustaz, Linus Student Advocate, if you are still there, how do we overcome this practical challenge of actually getting justice even where the state government or state governor has an interest? Say, for instance, election-related violence where people hardly ever get punished.
You see, it is the indigenous of those states that can, since the legislative houses have failed or are just there like dogs that they don't even bark, let alone to talk of biting. You see, are you saying that in every state we don't have some credible, courageous people who love their own states to work as the federal government is doing? Let these people go to court and say, impeach the governor. You see, they are the ones to suffer. It is unfortunate. When somebody says there is no way out, there is a way out. Get the governor, go to court and say, but normally it will be more effective if it is the indigenous of those states who say, I'm a tax-paying person, I'm an indigen of this state. What the breach of the constitution by the governor is biting us, is affecting us adversely. Go for impeachable offenses. The moment you do so, the governors will sit up. And then, at the end of it, we should pray that in 2023, we don't have the type of governors we have now. And I think that is the ultimate solution. Because let us just pray that we don't have lawless governors as we have now. And I have no apology at all. Most of them are lawless. It is not good. It's not good for any country at all.
Advocate of Nigeria, Yunus Ustaz Usman, we'd really like to appreciate you for your comments. You've joined us from Kaduna studio. Always a pleasure to have you on the program. Let me also appreciate Professor Ernest Ojukwu, who is also a senior advocate of Nigeria SAN and the Pioneer Head Nigeria Law School, Enugu. Always a pleasure to have you on our program, sir. Thank you. Okay, and also I'm afraid I have to appreciate Damian Agbe, who is Temba, Damian Agbe, Principal State Counsel, Department of Civil Appeals, Federal Ministry of Justice. Thank you very much. And finally, last but certainly not the least, His Excellency, former Governor of Edo State and Professor of Law, Professor Oserime Osumbo. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us.
Thank you very much.
All right, and that's it for Good Morning Nigeria today. But just before we go, a quick look at sports.
A survey by World Players Union, FIFPro and National Player Unions has found that 75% of male players want the World Cup to remain played every 4 years. FIFA is proposing to cut the gap between its tournaments to 2 years as part of a revamped calendar. The survey covered more than 1,000 players across 6 continents of more than 70 nationalities. It also found that most players ranked the World Cup and their domestic league as their favorite competitions. According to the survey, 77% of players in both Europe and Asia supported keeping the current schedule, dropping to 63% in the Americas and 49% among African players. The remainder was split between playing the tournament every 2 or 3 years. Meanwhile, Novak Djokovic has said he would rather miss out on future tennis trophies than be forced to get a COVID vaccine. Speaking exclusively to the BBC, he said he should not be associated with the anti-vax movement but supported an individual's right to choose. Djokovic was asked if he would sacrifice taking part in competitions such as Wimbledon and the French Open over his stance on the vaccine. Yes, that is the price that I'm willing to pay, he said.
Hopefully an end soon to this virus, and vaccination is probably the biggest effort that was made. Probably half of the planet was vaccinated, and I fully respect that. But I've always represented and always supported the freedom to choose what you put into your body. And I understand that not being vaccinated today, I'm unable to travel to most of the tournaments at the moment.
And that's the price you're willing to pay?
That is the price that I'm willing to pay.
The 20-time Grand Slam winner was deported from Australia last month after the government cancelled his visa in a row over his vaccine status.
All right, so that's it for us on Good Morning Nigeria today. As always, we appreciate your being with us. The program returns tomorrow, same time, 7 in the morning, to look after yourselves and one another. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Claire Adilabu Abdul Razak. Thank you for being with us. Always remember to join us in our fight against rape and rapists. From us here and the production crew, have a great day.
NTA, you can't beat the rich.
Nigeria is Africa's most populous nation, with cultural and media influence throughout the entire continent. But it's facing a conservation crisis.